Good afternoon, all, and I'd like to call to order the February 16th, 2021 Finance and Administrative Committee of the Town of Hilton Head Island. Zendaya, have we complied with Freedom of Information Act?
Yes, sir, we have.
Thank you. Committee members, please reply with present when called upon. Zendaya, please call the roll.
Mr. Harkin,
Present.
Mr. Stanford,
Present.
Mr. Brown,
Present.
and Mr. Lennox.
Present. We have a full committee. In addition to the committee members just named, we also have David Ames, councilman, looking in. Zendaya, does staff have any changes to the presented agenda?
No, sir, we do not.
Therefore, committee members, if you have any changes to make, please mention them when called upon. Please reply with approved or not approved to the agenda presented. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Zendaya, please call the roll.
Mr. Harkin,
Present.
Mr. Stanford,
Approved.
Mr. Brown,
Approved.
Mr. Lennox.
And I also approve. Have minutes from the previous F&A meeting of January 19th, 2021. Committee members, do you have any changes to the minutes as presented? If not, may I have a motion to approve? Thank you, Bill. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you.
Mr. Harkin,
Yes.
approved. Mr. Stanford,
Approved.
Mr. Brown,
Approved.
Mr. Lennox.
And I also approve. Zendaya, do we have any public in Section 6 citizen comments?
Mr. Chairman, public comments concerning today's agenda items were to be submitted electronically via the town's open town hall portal. The public comment period closed today at noon. At the conclusion of the open town hall, there were no comments. However, one citizen did sign up to speak before the committee today. At this time, Mr. Chairman, I do not see that caller on hold. So if you would like to maybe come back, or if you would like to proceed, it's up to you.
Zendaya, I think we will proceed with the agenda. If the caller comes into the queue, alert me, and as the time presents itself, we will bring the caller in.
Yes, sir, I will do that.
Thank you. Unfinished business, we have none. Under new business, we have two items. The first is an update of Hilton Head finances through January 31st, 2021. And as you all know, that's our 7-month interim. John Troyer, Director of Finance, will make the presentation. John, would you like questions and comments as you make your presentation, or would you prefer to hold them to the end?
As we go, sure. Interrupt me anytime.
Okay. John, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to share my screen. I hope that is displaying.
Yeah, it's clear.
Super. Financial update for the first 7 months, and so we've hit that halfway point, and now we're on the second half of the year. So here it is through January 31st. I put a format mostly the same as what you're used to seeing, but there might be a couple of minor changes. Year to date, this is a lot of numbers, and we have a big mixture from, if you look at the first item up, 63% down, second item, 43% up, fourth item, 114% up, fifth item, 2% up. It's a mixed bag everywhere, but you'll get to see some patterns here later on. One of the big issues that we had, and we'll talk about it more, is our friends at the county had some issues to work through before the property tax bills went out. And so what you're seeing is that our collections are delayed because of that. And so we're monitoring those very closely. We're working with our friends at the treasurer's office to make sure we're in communication as often as we need to be in order that we have the best information. But when the bills go out late, our collections come in late, and so you'll see that throughout this presentation. And just for a reference point, our total on this page, and this is similar presentations that we had in previous months, last month we were at 26% above year-to-date December. And with January, we're only 0.9% up. And so there's a dramatic shift from one month to the next. And we expect that to be temporary, but it's a dramatic shift. I'll go the correct way. Highlighted here, this is the same sheet with the different notes, but the items that are highlighted with the blue arrows from the tax increment, financing, road usage fee, stormwater, and property taxes general fund, all of these are on a similar time frame and connected to our property tax bills. And you'll notice that almost to a case, these are the ones that are negatives, and the rest of the numbers are positive. But for the electric franchise fee, which is off just 1.1%, but significantly off any revenues that are connected to the property taxes. We expect that's a timing difference, and you'll see more a little bit later on that.
We all understand the issues of timing as it pertains to when the tax bills went out, when that revenue would have come in ordinarily versus when it's actually coming in this year. John, do you expect it to be the next 30 to 60 days?
Yeah, the due date being March 31st, and then it takes a little bit for the county to deposit those checks, to balance those checks, and then distribute those checks to the different jurisdictions. And so it'll be another 2 weeks, probably March or April the 15th or so, before we really get the full picture. And so, yeah, we're 8 to 10 weeks away from that.
And would it be a fair assumption, given the active real estate market and given the way the reassessments occur at the sale of a property, that by year end in June, the property taxes will probably exceed last year's property tax collections?
That's my expectation.
Okay.
My expectation, at a minimum, is to this is just a delay and a temporary timing difference. And what we're experiencing is that, okay, what normally would have been collected in January and February is moving to February, March, and April. And I think we'll see that in the next couple of months. And yes, I 100% agree is with the active real estate market and what happens as the assessor records those transactions and those real estate values are updated, then the property tax numbers are updated, and we expect those numbers to go up because of the increase. Now, we have seen some anecdotal evidence, and you'll see that if somebody had a second home and they're taxed at 6%, and they decide to move to the island, and then they apply to the county for residence, even though those values go up in cases, then they can get the 4% approval, and the property taxes can go down as we see a migration of new residents instead of part-time residents. But it'll be an interesting mixture, and we'll want to examine that very closely as the year progresses and compare when we get the new tax roll to the old tax roll. Just there's going to be a lot of dynamics to it.
John, I've got a question for you. Obviously, we're all very pleased to see the business license revenue up so dramatically. You may have explained this before, but tell us what the reason for that is.
Yeah, the primary reason, so we're up $1.4 million from last year. The primary reason is the state changed their due date, and so we had $1 million that was from state revenue that really related to 2020. But because they changed their due date, it passed the window of availability for us to record that as a 2020 revenue, and so basically we started the year $1 million ahead on business licenses.
Good job.
That being said, we're still $400,000 up over last year, and so that's a really good start to the year. Even taking that out, we've got a strong start to this year.
Thank you.
And just to follow up with Mr. Stanford's question, our business license income, you can look, this happens to be 2019, but they're similar patterns to 2020, and we would expect a similar pattern to 2021. But you can see from everything from January to June is much more important than what happened before through December. And so it's a much more important time of the year, and you can see how big this is at the end of June, those big collections. And if one of them got delayed like last year, it's real easy for that to tip into the next year. So that's just part of what we do with the year end is to break down the timing and make sure that it gets to the appropriate year.
Thank you.
General fund revenues, you can kind of see the 3 years look very similar. From July, August, September, we had a really good year. That's the current year isn't looking very good. October, November, they're all very similar to the prior year. And then if you look at January, this is each month. January is just a significantly higher month in all collections, primarily because of the property taxes. I put a little note here in that this is our property taxes that are delayed, and so you're really seeing that show up. We've talked about this, property taxes, and so yes, we're going to monitor that well into April and May. Here's a picture of last year's property tax collections, and you can see just how important January and February are. And so if the bills don't go out until January, that is much less time. And so what these two large months in January and February, my expectation is that we will have those in March and April. And you can see I've added the current year here to this next slide, but significantly lower than the previous year, but it's my full expectation that this is but a timing difference, but something worth paying very close attention to because it's so significant to our budget. And the difference year to year is $4 million, and so that will come up later. Yeah, you asked the question, well, how much is it? How much are we behind? We're behind $4 million. And so we have collected since January 31st into February almost that $4 million here in the general fund property taxes, and so we're not quite to where January should be here in mid-February, and so that will kind of give you a little insight into that, but it's a good start to February. Year to date, you can look from July to December. Consistently, our 2021 numbers were ahead of last year until January came up and until this property tax delay, and that has put us temporarily behind last year. We don't expect that to stay, but we are certainly keeping a close eye. And yeah, just through December ahead. Now in January we're behind both 2020 and 2019. Year-to-date revenues, I want to show this just to show that February through June are significant collection months, and so the earlier months are less weighted and we have fewer collections, and the second half of the year is much more important on the collection side. So we'll be keeping a very close eye on that. Year-to-date collections, we compare these same collection of revenues, which are not all of them, but I think they're pretty representative, and say, okay, we have collected $33.8 million compared to last year's total of 67.8, and so that's right at half. So 7 months in, we have collected half of everything that we collected last year. Our expectation is that we should beat it, but we'll see. We need to see the details. Just to emphasize where we are year to year, property taxes we've collected for the general fund $4 million out of 15 million, so we're 26% in at this time. Last year we had collected $8 million or 56% of the budget, and so it just shows how significant that is. And if we were to include that $4 million, our numbers would be significantly higher for the totals too, is that we'd be well ahead of that 49.9%. So this is just a, yes, sir.
Could you go back to permits? Can you break that out for us? I would imagine some of the key buckets are commercial for commercial development and for private home development. Is there anything else in that permit barrel?
I think that captures it, and that's where the vast majority of the dollars are. We'll get a separate schedule, and we'll fill you in on more details, because there's several components that make up permits, and we'll share some details.
Yeah, where I'm going, if you could remember this, is I'd like to see where we're trending on permits for commercial and permits for, private housing. Thank you.
Yeah, we are encouraged by the activity, and we'll break some of that down, and we'll give you some more detail just to look at this. But at this point in time, at 49% of last year, that's an indicator that we're going to exceed last year's numbers. Another graphical representation. Last year at this time, we were 49.5% of what became the totals. And so those are all good early signals in spite of the property taxes. Expenses, you can kind of see the pattern of the last 2 years. How did we do in the first 7 months? The outlier here, if you throw in the current year, we did have an extra payroll in December, and that kind of makes it look odd. But as you take the whole, because in our normal payroll, we have 26 pay periods each year, and so that doesn't break out evenly to 2 per pay period. There's 2 months each year that have an extra one, and so that can cause our numbers to be a little bit different. But January, we're back to normal expenditure level like we would expect. Here's where it shapes up with the rest of the year. And June, I would like to mention June. If you consider that one of our primary expenses is payroll, and if you work through the end of the month and get paid in the first week of the month, during the year, that gets recorded as the next month. It's when we make that pay date is when the expense is recorded. At the end of the year, for June 30th, if you work through the end of the month and get paid in the first week of the new month, we shore that up, and we would include that in the month of the old, and that's why our June expenses look so high, is that we basically changed from a cash to an accrual basis, and that makes June look like a bigger expense month than it normally would. Year-to-date expenses, we're tracking very systematically. I think it's a conservative 1.7% more than last year to date. You can see how does it look compared to the rest of the year. And I think this is a stable and predictable pattern going just like we would expect. If you want to get to a little bit more detail, you can see some of the different divisions and departments and how they are trending. But 1.7%, your total general fund, 1.7% over last year.
Surprises there.
Really? I don't think so. I think, and I'll flip to the next page, and you say, okay, well, why is town council higher? Well, this year there was a parking study. Last year there wasn't. Okay, with town manager, we all know we've got a temporary vacancy. Administrative, it's the same thing. Much of this is personnel driven, and so you have a temporary vacancy or vacancies longer this year than last year, and it will drive these numbers. In finance, my own department, we're not traveling. There are no conferences, and so that's a reason to be less than last year also. And the flip side of this is also true, is that if there were vacancies last year that are not there this year, it can seem like there's an increase in the budget. A couple of things that we did implement this current year is that the town did implement merit raises, and they're in there, and they did implement the compensation study, the pay and classification study, and so both of those pieces are in current year numbers. And so I think you look at our fire rescue numbers, and I think it's a signal, it's a good signal to say that we were able to do some benefits for our fire rescue people, and they are implemented, and they're being paid a market wage like they should be. And so you see these numbers up.
John, I've got a question for you about sheriff and beach fees.
Yeah.
The first comment I would have is, since we're in kind of a hiatus with paying the sheriff's the fee to the county while we're in the middle of this dispute, that's not reflected in this 13% change. It would look to me like that would be beach fees because of a somewhat impeded summer season. Talk to us about that a little bit, if you would.
Sure. Yes. The dispute over the sheriff's funding is a piece of this. And what we're doing, and from an accounting standpoint, is that we are taking the town's last offer, $2 million per year, and we are setting that aside in escrow. And we've had a discussion with our auditors about the most appropriate way to set this aside into escrow. We're setting that $2 million aside, and so it counts as an expense each month as we go, in accordance with our last offer. And so, yes, that is less than last year, and so we're seeing a savings, but we're not recording that as zero expenses. We're recording that at a rate of $2 million per year.
So beach fees, you've got these lumped together. What's been the change in beach fees caused by the pandemic? Do you have any reading on that?
Yeah, we've got those lumped together, and I'll split those out for you. The contract expired, and so we have a new contract. And I know that there was basically a CPI adjustment for the beach services. But we'll get some details for you.
Okay, thank you.
John, when you look at public projects and facilities within the context of year end, what are some of the significant projects we're holding in abeyance till we determine how we think we're going to end up the year?
That's a piece of it, and part of it is just as far as what works the best, and as far as the timing goes, we've got a number of budget items that include getting the parks ready for spring, and so you're going to see that. One of the things that you're seeing is that the facilities people have been working on some renovations to town hall, and so that takes some of their attention away from maybe some of the other projects. And I look at all of this as just temporary, and as we would expect, they're going to finish out the year doing most everything that they planned. And so we record something less than last year, but in the end of the year, when they get to these projects, that budget will be expended, is our expectation.
Okay, thank you.
I've got a couple questions, John.
Yes, sir.
Just so that I'm clear, you mentioned that the merit raises are included here, and I think we discussed this at the last meeting, but the summary report that was in our packet still speaks to the merit raises as part of the delays that were implemented until we had a better read on our income. So I just want to be clear that those have been distributed.
Thank you for asking that. And part of why I left that in there, and I apologize for that to not be clear. And so that would be my fault for not being more clear. But I wanted to just keep that indication there that, okay, this was something that we have done. It's in the past now. But as we were going into the year, there was uncertainty, and part of how we met that uncertainty was to delay that, but now that delay is passed and the merit raises are already implemented. And so I apologize if the memo, because I know exactly where you're talking about, the memo isn't clear.
Okay, my next question, the fire and rescue is up about $600K. Is any of that due to our response to COVID?
We have been recording our expenses that are allowed into overtime that are specific to COVID into our natural disaster fund, but most of what they're doing is not going there. I'll give a report on what we have charged to the natural disaster fund because it's for things that are specifically only for COVID, and we'll give a report. I'll make a note of that. Thank you for the question.
And is it also a chance that we will see some reimbursement for those particular items?
We have been recording those, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to segregate, is that we have gotten some state funding, and we're hoping that we have these identified and segregated so that if they do become reimbursable, we're already prepared.
Okay, yeah, that'd be nice if you could show that in your next report. And my last question, the bottom line here, the townwide, there's a 10% increase there, and the note says includes concourse and art center. Can you recall how much of that, I guess $260K there?
Yeah, it's of that. Yeah, there was a $200,000 one-time item for the concourse and $150,000 for the art center one-time special grants. And so you take those pieces out, and our townwide is less.
Got it. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Spending, how are we tracking? And we like to compare to budget. We're 58% through the year, and our total spending in our general fund is 51%. And so that is favorable. It's not as favorable as you might think with the accrual. So basically an accrual that conversion might be about a half a month's worth. And so that adds 3 or 4%. So if you add 3 or 4% to our 51%, that would get you at 54, 55% compared to a 58% through the year. And so These are indicators that we're under budget and all in all categories. And I think this shows that we're operating well within our budget. So when you have revenues that are kind of back-end loaded, expenses that are more consistent month to month, then that means that we have to use our reserves temporarily within a fiscal year. And here's the last 2 years where it shows that we have temporarily used our reserves July through January, and then at February we turn the corner. Actually, the trend changes in January, and February we come back to a positive. And so there's just the last 2 years.
That was 2019 and 2020. And you made a comment earlier about the extension on business license revenue. And $1 million of what we have in revenue this fiscal year that should have been in 2020's revenue. So if you take a look at just June, and the June of 2020 shows a small $1 million surplus. If that business license income would have come in the time that it should have, that would have been double.
Yes. That's exactly the case. And how does this compare to the current year? The blue in the current year, our deficit, you can see temporary deficit. I always want to be sure to include that. August, September, October, November, and December was less than both 2020 and 2019. And then when we have a delay in the property taxes, you can see that we haven't reduced that temporary deficit as much as the previous years because of that delay in the property taxes. So it's a different version of the same numbers, but you can see December being the low point for all 3 years of the year, and then January we turned the corner. It's just that with the smaller January property tax collections, we had a smaller bump up in January, and we'll want to monitor that. But my expectation is as we get to April, these all 3 numbers should be converging as we get closer. General fund results were 9% on revenue, less than last year. But if you were going to consider that we're $4 million behind in property taxes, be running about $2 million ahead. You take the business license out of that, and we're still running about $1 million ahead, which is, I think, a favorable position to be in, and we just want to make sure our property taxes come in like they should. Aaron and I just did. This is a lot of numbers on one sheet of paper, but if you were to take and just make the assumption that we got the same amount of property taxes as last year, our revenues would be up 14%, and our temporary deficit would be 74% less than last year. So once these property taxes come in, I think we're going to see more favorable numbers. It will probably be past February, past March, and into April before we're able to fully catch back up to the previous years because the property taxes have such a significant impact. Debt savings, we've heard that before, so no need to go on. And one thing about debt is that the last new money issue that we did was in fiscal 19, $5 million that basically is paying for the primary thing, is paying for the new fire station. 2020 and 2021, the only debt issues that we have done is refunding for savings, and so that's 2 years in a row. The issues, there's the same numbers, same words as last time. I just added property taxes are central to our budget in red. Item number 4, another month with positive trends, except for property taxes. And so I think if you take the totality of everything, without property taxes, we had another positive month. And so we just need to make sure that our property taxes come in like we expect them to. Again, the only thing different here I added is property taxes are subject to the budget. So it's a very important item just in total. And this is the general fund is only half of our property taxes. We also get property taxes in our TIF fund, our debt service fund, and our natural disaster fund. And so out of a $77 million budget, about $30 million is property taxes. So it's very significant, and we'll keep you updated as we go.
John, are you expecting any dramatic issues having to do with collection of those property taxes?
I think the issues that have happened are in the past, and it's now just a matter of the process got started later, and so our collections are going to be proportionately later, and that's all. And so because it should all happen within this fiscal year, so we won't have that dynamic like we did with the business license last year, where it spanned over the fiscal year. My expectation is the property taxes will be much more apples to apples with last year's property taxes by June 30th.
But what I was trying to ask is, are you expecting any collection problems having to do with the property taxes other than the delay in the bills and therefore the delay in payment?
You know, some people wanted to, and we've had good discussions with our friends at the treasurer's office. Some people wanted to pay before December 31st for their tax purposes, and their experience and their numbers are showing, if you consider just the number of days since the tax bills went out, are very consistent with previous years. It's just that their starting point got started later, and their expectations is that we will have, in the end, a normal collection year or better. And then next, we'll have monthly financial statements, and so there's more to read and more detail. We'll get that out tomorrow, and certainly we thank you for the questions, and we'll make sure that we'll follow up with additional information, and maybe we'll feature some of that in future monthly financial statements, just to help provide a more complete picture. But at this moment, Mr. Chairman, I would ask for any questions.
John, if I may, as you, it's hard to believe, but the spring's not too far off, and that's one of our growth seasons. Do you get any intelligence from the hospitality sector, either directly or indirectly from the chamber, to get some idea of how we may be trending next year, this spring?
It seems, and the most recent numbers that I have seen is that future bookings were positive and included strong numbers in the bookings and strong in the revenue per day. I think they like to refer to it as the RevPAR. And so both indicators seem to be positive, and I'm sure that our friends at the chamber are much more well versed in that, and I've just shared a very simplistic report.
Thank you.
Bill, Josh and I attended the marketing council meeting last week for the chamber, and as you know, there are a lot of the resort general managers there. They mentioned that bookings were good. However, the group business is gone. They're just not getting any group business. So that's the offset, perhaps, to a very robust retail side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Alex.
John, thank you for the detailed report. Appreciate you keeping us up to speed on a monthly basis. I think it's very important that we continue that process, particularly with there still being some uncertainties. I guess two comments more than questions. As we give our future reports, getting closer to June, this is kind of following up on Mr. Stanford's point. I'm not sure what percentage of our property tax collection typically comes in late, but I would just be curious to see, using that percentage as a factor to see if the reserve load is going to, need some attention or not. Okay, I don't know that, but I'd like to have some confidence that we're not going to be diving too deep into the reserves because of late payments. So if you could include that, that'd be great. And the other is the real estate transfer fee. At this point is up gravely, and of course I don't anticipate that it is going to change anyway but up moving from here to June. But the reinvestment of those funds is on my mind, and I just appreciate as we roll into our budget discussions that we really put some emphasis on that and see if there's any chance of us trying to result in an increase in that line moving into 2022. Okay, I'm just planting a seed with that. Not quite sure what that looks like at the moment. I'm very realistic that we won't be able to cover the same ground that we have, but I think it's important that we at least put a little note next to it as to how we can continue to improve in that area.
Any others for John? David?
Yeah, I had two questions. I think one has been pretty adequately answered, had to do with property tax collections. I'm just interested, John, what percentage do we normally have to carry over the next year? Do you have any idea?
About 4%, between 4 and 5%, depending on the year. Yeah.
Okay, good. The other question I had, I think about 2 years ago, council voted to segregate a certain amount of money dedicated to workforce housing. Would you double check at your convenience the amount of that money and whether or not it is still a segregated line item?
Yes, I can tell you right now, it's the exact same amount. It's still segregated. We basically reserve that in our equity portion of the balance sheet. And so I do that calculation each year for the audit, and it hasn't changed since town council took action.
What is that number again?
And I don't remember exactly the number.
All right, I think it's somewhere between 250 and 350K.
I was thinking 345, but I'll go back and look it up and share that with everybody. But the number hasn't changed.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. Thank you.
John, good report. I'd like to wrap it up with a couple comments and a couple questions. When does the 10-year extension of the TIF expire?
2025.
2025. So we have 4 more years of TIF property taxes.
Yes.
Okay, the discussion about property taxes really has 2 elements. One is a timing element, and we're confident that we understand what that means. And the other that I think David and Alex were touching on is the credit element. And our collections have routinely been over 95%. And I don't see that trend changing as a result of COVID, although I guess time will tell, and later in this year we'll know more fully whether that happens. I I stopped over on Hunter Road at a business, and I was speaking with a business owner. And John, I was unaware that the airport is buying up properties on Hunter Road to make room for a Delta Airlines hangar. Does that sound right?
I haven't checked that, but I'm sure that's true.
David, have you?
Unless there's a new development, the purchase of that land was to expand the parking lot for both rental cars and passenger storage.
This guy said that Delta wanted their own hangar, and as a result of that, I see Josh shaking his head. The properties were being bought up, and I say that for a couple of reasons. One is that going to have a meaningful effect on our property tax collections in and around the airport? And two is most of the businesses that have already sold their properties, rather than relocate on the island, were relocating in Bluffton. Josh, something to add?
Yeah, to your first point about what's going on at the airport, I was going to draw your attention to the fact that there is an approved master plan that was jointly passed by town council and by county council. And so the development activities that occur on the airport are subject to that plan. To David's point, I believe he's correct. What's in the works now is an update to the terminal, an expansion of that facility, and an expansion of their parking capabilities, both of which were kind of called for in the master plan itself. But in terms of hangars for any of the commercial airlines, there is none that I'm aware of, and I don't believe that any would be in the works.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. My last comment really is pertaining to Glenn's question regarding the sheriff's office. John, I understand how we are escrowing on a monthly basis or accruing that $2 million for the public safety services. Routinely, prior to this year, we were paying approximately $3.3 million, plus an additional $300,000 or $400,000 in special services, to include beach services, the RBC Heritage, and other things like that, some of which did not happen in this year and will not happen upcoming in this spring. That said, I think we are still under budgeted expenses or expenses in the prior year when bringing in public safety expenses.
Yes, and as part of a budget amendment earlier in the year, we did reallocate some of those savings as the town was anticipating doing some parks upgrades and taking over more of a responsibility for some of the parks. And so, and that work is on its own timeline, but some expenditures were made from the benefit of the savings.
And that came through this committee.
Yes.
I recall that happening. Final question, is the county maintaining any of our parks at all anymore?
I defer to Josh on that.
From what I've heard, I do believe they are providing some level of maintenance activity. However, what I would draw you back to is the fact that their adopted fiscal budget removed all funding for those maintenance activities. And so yeah. I think there is some level of carryover. I do know I've seen some of their vehicles down here occasionally, but I don't know that I could give you a very accurate level as what that might translate.
Okay, Josh, thank you. John, good job. Good job. We all hope the trend continues. It will be very interesting to see what property tax collections, TIF property tax collections, and stormwater fees are for the months of February and March. Hopefully, at the end of March, going into our final quarter for fiscal 2021, we'll be back on track.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Chairman Lennox, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
You sparked the thought when you were talking about the business on Hunter Road that is relocating. I'm just curious to know if the business owner gave you any indication as to why they were choosing Bluffton over Hilton Head.
No, Alex. The two businesses that I were talking with were Beachside Tire and Stoneworks.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Business agenda item B. Terry Lewis has a presentation as it pertains to volunteers in medicine parking. Terry, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you. So I'm here, Terry Lewis for the record. I'm here to discuss a town-owned property adjacent to the Volunteers in Medicine parcel, which is located on Palmetto Parkway. And I'm going to ask Zendaya to share attachment B so everybody can see exactly where we're talking about. And I'll give you a little background while she gets to that. Volunteers in Medicine approached the town with concerns about their limited parking. There's a high volume of clientele, and currently there just isn't enough existing parking. The town owns the adjacent vacant 1.06 acre tract. This tract, and here you can see it. You can see the Volunteers in Medicine in orange, the adjacent town-owned tract next to that, and then the much larger, the greater Northridge tract right above that. So as I said, the town owns that adjacent tract. It's 1.06 acres, and it includes a 0.35 acre isolated freshwater wetland. This wetland, this portion of that property is under conservation easement, and the Hilton Head Land Trust holds that easement. So we reached out to the Hilton Head Land Trust, and they are in support of releasing the property from the easement and having it reassigned to the greater Northridge tract. This tract is already encumbered by a much greater conservation easement. You can see the size of that tract at a little over 66 acres. A little over 54 acres is under conservation easement. The staff is recommending that this proposal be supported with two conditions: that the parcel, what would be the formerly town-owned parcel, be used only for parking, and that the existing conservation easement would be relocated. So support from this committee would allow us to work with both them and the Hilton Head Land Trust to develop agreements to both sell the property and to relocate the easement. Lauren Williams with the Hilton Head Land Trust and Charles Sampson with the Volunteers in Medicine I believe are both on the line as well, and can also offer additional information if you need it. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, Terry, thank you. I know there are a couple of questions. Glenn, would you like to open it up?
Yes, thank you. Has there been discussion about sale of the property versus lease of the property? It seems to me it would be difficult to sell the property at a discounted rate, and I'm not sure what the capital position of Volunteers in Medicine is. So what is the general plan on that?
So what I did, I had looked back. I mean, certainly that's a discussion for town council to have. I looked back at when the original parcel where Volunteers in Medicine is located today, and it looks like that was sold for $1 in 2005. So I don't know if town council would maybe consider doing something similar with this parcel.
Okay, so we haven't talked about the idea of a lease, right? You mentioned the freshwater wetland on the property. That would continue to be protected even though the conservation easement was lifted. Is that correct?
That's not correct. So in this instance, the isolated freshwater wetland would be filled and would be mitigated on the greater Northridge tract, probably at a size greater than it is today so we would take that 0.35 acres and potentially make that a larger mitigation on the greater Northridge tract.
All of this would be done under the supervision of the town.
That's correct.
Okay. What's the situation about specimen trees on this property?
So when we first started having these discussions, Rocky Browder, our environmental planner, walked the track to both look at the quality of the wetland and determine if there were any specimen trees. At that time, he didn't believe that there were any specimen trees that would be affected with this. If there are any specimen trees, they would be located in protected buffers.
Okay, so what you want to do is to go ahead and proceed to come up with a transaction and come back to council for final approval of the transaction. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Any others?
Yes. Yes. Could you, I think it's already been stated, but could you restate it again? In terms of VIM, do they hold title to the land they're on, or are they leasing that?
They own that property.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Terry, you are asking that the Finance Administrative Committee support, and I use the word support, this proposal as presented, in which we partner with VIM and the Hilton Head Land Trust to sell. Should we include sell or lease
Certainly.
the town-owned property to VIM with the following conditions and the two that you mentioned? So I will add sell or lease town-owned property to VIM with the following conditions. Only to be used for parking, and the conservation easement is to be relocated at a minimum size equal to its existing size on the property.
Yes, sir.
Alex?
Mr. Chairman, just so that I can get caught up here, being a new kid on the block, is this particular item something that has already bubbled up through executive session where normally transactions of this type occur, or are we going the other way? I'm just curious.
This has been discussed at least a couple of times over the past 3 or 4 years. This really, Terry, correct me if I'm wrong, this is really the first time that it has come to the committee level.
Yes, it's the first time it's been to the committee.
Okay, thank you.
Tom, I have a further question.
All right, Glenn?
Thank you. Terry, I think we should include a reversion to the town should VIM ever have the desire to sell the property. It was acquired for some conservation. I'm fully in support of helping VIM in this, but I'm not sure I'd be interested in helping some other party acquiring title. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So Glenn, you're suggesting a reverter clause be a third condition?
Yes, sir.
And Mr. Chair, I support that.
Yes.
Too. The move.
David, did you have something to add?
Glenn covered it. That was my thought and concern.
Okay. I think we're clear. We now have 3 conditions instead of 2, and the third being the reverter clause. And the only other change that we've made was to add the option to lease along with sell. May I have a motion to approve this and recommend it to the town council for further discussion?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Bill. And second?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion or questions? If there are none, all those please indicate by raising your right hand. All those opposed by the same. I can't see Bill, but I assume he's in favor of it. Terry, I think we are 4-0 in favor of recommending this to town council.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Any other business to come before the Finance and Administrative Committee?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I do have the caller on hold. If you would like to go back to that section of our agenda.
Sure.
Mr. Hoagland? Mr. Hoagland?
Hello? Yes? Hello? Afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Afternoon.
Please state your name and address of record and make your comments.
Skip Hoagland, Windmill Harbor. You're not in afternoon. You're not in FOIA compliance. Troya needs a forensic audit, and the council has no clue. The only path forward is lawsuits. We already have a procurement lawsuit, and everybody will be deposed on the tax misuse. I have asked council to comply to my FOIA on what Bill Miles did with millions of ATAX funds for hurricanes, COVID, to include full accounting, receipts, invoices, and this council said they did not have this info. Bill Miles told all of us he was not going to provide the information to this council, even his chamber board and his 1,500 members. He said it's his secret sauce, and basically only he and his accountants, Ray Deal and Ray Warco, and lawyer Tigas and Bethea and Paula Bethea, can see the accounting. Riley Gruber Orlando illegally, secretly misused tax funds to join the county and town as chamber members. Mark Orlando even illegally used Bluffton Town employees to profit his friend Bill Miles. The town, as a tax-paid chamber member, now has rights to see all the chamber accounting, the same records as Bill Miles gets under the South Carolina nonprofit law. Town and chamber violated South Carolina constitutional law to use public funds for private purposes, not for the public good, reason, or benefit. Mr. Harkins, McCann, and Lennox committed fraud when they stated they went to the chamber offices to see the accounting and a few receipts laid out on the table with Bill Miles and CPA Ray Deal. About 1 hour inspection and determined all was honest. Is this how you would handle your $3 million investment? The town hired the chamber to be the DMO to market and promote tourism only. Then why are you allowing Bill Miles to upsell advertising on the ATAX funded DMO website to profit, launder money, commit tax evasion by not paying IRS UBIT taxes, violating 501-C6 tax codes, and illegally generating a $400,000 salary for theft for this thief Miles, who claims he owns the DMO app and website versus the town owning it? Ames and Lennox, have you seen the over $1 million of ATAX funds Bill Miles took to Canada to develop the app and the website versus support local businesses? Perhaps Mark Orlando from Canada can find out. You do not have to answer to me, but you will have to answer to lawyers and depositions, law enforcement, South Carolina Turk, DOR, and Treasury. Also, we will find out soon if the $200,000 of tax money you loaned to Kim Likens and town crook lawyer Greg Alford was an illegal criminal act. You replaced Crook Alford with his former law partner Curtis Coltrane, and now replace Crook Riley with his crook buddy Orlando. The local cesspool of incestuous corruption continues, and it will be exposed. You all, like I said before, you ought to all be handcuffed and escorted out of the building. Every one of you. Thank you very much.
Is there any other business to come before the committee? If there is none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Glenn. Is there a second? Thank you, Bill. We stand adjourned.